We are surrounded by plastic. I mean, it's everywhere, in our homes, our cars, our tech. But what about the plastic that we can't see? These microscopic particles that are now being found, well, everywhere, from the deepest parts of the ocean to the tops of the highest mountains, and yeah, even inside of us. So let's dive into what the science is actually telling us about this invisible invasion and what it might mean for our health.
Just take a look at this number, 0.125 grams.
Now that right there, that's the estimated amount of microplastic that an average person might be consuming every single week. Suddenly, this isn't just some far-off environmental issue, is it? It's become deeply personal.
To really put that into perspective, because what does 5 grams even feel like? Well, one study put it this way. It's potentially equivalent to the weight of a credit card. Just think about that for a second. The same amount of material that makes up your bank card entering your body week after week.
So you have to be asking, where is all of this microscopic plastic even coming from? To get that, we need to zoom way out and look at the absolutely massive scale of global plastic production.
Get this. In 2023 alone, the world produced over 400 million metric tons of plastic. And that staggering amount of stuff, it doesn't just disappear when we toss it. Nope, it just breaks down.
And this little graphic here shows perfectly how that happens. See, it all starts with the plastic things we use every single day. The bottles, the containers, the packaging. They're all made of polymers, which are just these long chains of molecules.
But over time, when they're out in the sun or tossed around in the water, those long polymer chains start to get brittle and fragment. They break up into smaller and smaller pieces, becoming what we call microplastics, these tiny particles less than 5 millimeters in size.
But it doesn't even stop there. Those microplastics just keep breaking down, getting even smaller, until they become nanoplastics. And these particles are so incredibly tiny that they can become airborne, float around in our water, and you guessed it, easily get inside our bodies.
And that brings us to the big question, right? How exactly are these tiny particles getting inside of us? Well, scientists have pinpointed 3 main ways this happens.
First, and this is the big one, is ingestion. We're literally eating and drinking them. The second is inhalation. We breathe them in. And the third is through our skin. Dermal contact, although most research suggests this is a much smaller risk unless the skin is already broken.
Okay, so let's focus on ingestion for a minute. The plastics that show up most often in human samples are polypropylene, or PP, and PET. And what's wild is just how familiar these names are. We're talking about our water bottles, our yogurt containers, and all those takeout cups.
I mean, you know these symbols, right? They're on the bottom of almost every single plastic food and drink container you buy. And study after study shows that particles from these very materials are leaching into what we consume, especially if they get heated up.
Now, what about breathing them in? Inhalation. Well, the reason our lungs are such a major concern is because of their structure. They have this massive surface area, about 150 square meters, and the barrier between the air in your lungs and your actual bloodstream is incredibly thin. We're talking less than a micrometer. It's basically an open door for nanoparticles to get right into our system. So the plastics are in. They've been found in our blood, our lungs, our livers, even in placentas. But what are they actually doing once they're there? Okay, let's take a quick tour through the human body to see what the research is starting to suggest.
First up, the GI tract, the main point of entry. Some studies have found a direct correlation between the amount of microplastics in your gut and the severity of conditions like inflammatory bowel disease. And in occupational studies, looking at people who work in the plastics industry with really high exposure, they've pointed to an elevated risk for certain cancers.
All right, next up, the respiratory system. And again, a lot of the strongest evidence comes from these occupational settings where people are breathing in high concentrations of the stuff all day. And there, exposure has been linked to a whole range of serious conditions, from asthma all the way to an increased risk of lung cancer.
And the potential impact really seems to be systemic, affecting the whole body. Research has started to suggest links to neurological symptoms like headaches and fatigue, certain blood cancers in those highly exposed workers, and, at least in animal studies, pretty significant impacts on fertility and reproduction.
So that's the view from the organ level, the big picture. But to really understand how this damage might be happening, scientists have zoomed in even further. They're looking at what happens when a single plastic particle meets a single human cell in a petri dish.
These are called in vitro studies. And what researchers do is they take human cell lines from the gut or lungs or liver, and they directly expose them to nano and microplastics.
This lets them see what's happening on a molecular level, without all the other complexities of a living body getting in the way.
And the results from these lab studies, well, they're pretty concerning. They've confirmed that these plastic particles can cause a whole cascade of harmful effects. They can cause cytotoxicity, that's a fancy word for direct cell damage that can even kill the cell. Then there's genotoxicity, we're talking damage to our fundamental DNA. On top of that, they can trigger inflammation and even something called apoptosis, which is basically a self-destruct command for the cell.
So the evidence is definitely mounting, from the level of our cells all the way up to large population studies. But it's important to remember this is still a pretty new and evolving field of research. So what happens next? Where do we go from here?
I think it's crucial to be really clear about what we know versus what we still need to figure out. So here's what we know for a fact. Plastics are getting into our bodies, and they're building up. We have strong evidence linking high-level occupational exposure to disease. But here's the other side. We don't yet know what a safe level of exposure is for the general population, and we really don't understand the full long-term effects of the kind of low-level exposure that most of us are facing every single day.
Look, there's no question that plastic was a revolutionary material. It absolutely changed our world and brought incredible convenience and innovation. But as these invisible particles become a permanent part of our environment and a part of our bodies, we're left with this profound and honestly pretty urgent question: how is it changing us?